everyone. Welcome to my Avivences. Welcome to the European Fertility Society. We are back with Alan Thornhill, as you can see him right here, fertility expert, fertility coach, but with plenty of experience. We can say that already, I think, and it's great to have you back. So how are you, Alan? You've mentioned that you have been traveling. I'm glad to see you back here.
Yeah, I've been traveling in Peru, but doing my Instagrams from there. Some people noticed them parrots in the background, so
I saw it as well. Yeah. Yes.
So yeah, it's good to be back, and I'm really excited to be here tonight. And I think I've got a really interesting presentation, and I'm hoping there'll be some good questions afterwards.
Yes, we are looking forward to it, of course. As you know, our topic is not easy, I would say, and this is on everyone's mind, I'm sure, as well. We will talk all about the money when it comes to IVF. So Alan has prepared some tips for you. So we will start with his presentation on this topic, and afterwards, as always, there will be time for the questions. So please put those in the chat, and we will be happy to help you out with any of your questions. If you have any issues, please refresh your page. It should be all okay. Please confirm if anyone else can hear, so we can make sure of this. Please let us know, okay? I think that everything should be okay, but it would be great if you could confirm that you can hear us, okay? Thank you. And of course, now, as I've mentioned, we will start with Alan's presentation on our topic, but you can type the questions. I already see one of the questions as well. But of course, if there are more questions, yeah, thank you so much, Doris, for confirming this for me. And now we are sure that everything is working. And as I've mentioned, please put the questions in the chat so Alan can help you out and give you some tips, I'm sure, useful ones as well. Alan, let's start with sharing your screen. Let's make sure it's all working.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Okay, so are we good? Can you see the screen?
Not yet.
Not yet. We tried this earlier and it was good. Now?
I cannot see anything, so not sure here.
Okay.
But nothing happens like right now.
Now?
Can you just try to click on the screen sharing button?
Yeah, I'll do it again. I'll refresh it.
Just maybe we need to refresh, because yes, it was working right before we started.
Okay. So let me go back to enable screen sharing.
Let's try that. Nothing yet.
Can you see my screen at all?
Nope.
Oh,
not at all. Yep.
That's a pity. We had this working before.
I know.
I'm just trying.
Bear with us, everyone. We have this covered just in case, but let's try once more, and hopefully it will work. If not, maybe you can try refreshing. Oh, okay, something's happening.
How about now?
Yes, we just need the full screen, and it should be
full screen.
Yes, now it's working perfectly.
Good to go. Laser pointer.
I can see it as well.
Perfect. Right.
Perfect. We've got it.
Sorry for the delay, everyone. Okay, so I'm not saying this in a happy way. IVF, it's all about the money. Unfortunately, it is about the money. It's become a bit of a business, as I've said in a number of my webinars before. But really, this is about trying to help you understand the costs a little bit better. Think of ways that you might be able to fund your treatment, and ways that you might be able to save money. And I realize that a lot of you are in different parts of your journey, but I think there are tips for everybody. People who haven't even begun their journey yet, haven't had any treatment, haven't really spent any money, and people maybe who've already spent quite a lot of money. I think there's tips for everybody. So I hope that you'll find that useful, and I hope that will generate some interesting questions at the end. So in basic terms, what we're going to cover today is planning before treatment. So that's for those people who maybe haven't done anything yet, or people who've had some treatments and are beginning to think, what should we do next? So I've got some clients at the moment who are saying, well, I've had 3 cycles, hasn't been successful. What do I do next? So in a way, they're back to the starting square again. So I think sometimes it's worth you've learned a lot along the way, but sometimes it's worth treating it like you're starting completely fresh. because maybe there's some tips that would have been useful to know beforehand. Then I'm going to focus on things to watch for during treatment, so costs and other things during the treatment itself, because they may not have been obvious before treatment. Things to do after treatment. Of course, the assumption here is that maybe the treatment hasn't been successful, because I'm not here really to give advice about what to do if treatment is successful, although there will definitely be lots of costs after that, of course. And then a little bonus, got a slide on overseas treatment. And by the way, any of this or most of this stuff is available on my Instagram reels, if you want to check that out. But obviously it's short and sweet, and so hopefully we can go through in a bit more detail today. And then a little bit on next steps. So I usually start my talks with bad news and good news, but I think it's just to kind of set the scene. Any of you who've watched my talks before know that I try to be helpful, I try to be positive, but I'm also straight talking. I want you to know the facts and the sort of the reality, so that we can manage expectations properly. So we know that more than half of all IVF cycles are unsuccessful on average, and largely that's because in women fertility declines dramatically with age, and over time we see more and more women starting their families later. So naturally that means that more IVF cycles are needed and more IVF cycles are unsuccessful. And as I've said here, most people need several cycles. Obviously, there are people who are successful on the first cycle, but to have that kind of average of, I think it might be 2.3 cycles or something that people need to be successful, that means some people get pregnant on the first go, some people it might take multiple cycles, or maybe none at all. Maybe they'll be unsuccessful the whole way through. And that can make the process very, very expensive. You don't need me to tell you that. I think everybody knows that. But today is more about focusing on some of the details and some of the shortcuts, some of the tips, and some of the subtleties around costs and funding. The truth is that clinics are getting busier and more businesslike. And why I say that is, I hope that a lot of the stuff I say is kind of fact-based and not necessarily my opinion or my judgment of it. But when a clinic gets more businesslike, it means a couple of things. It means that you're probably going to end up spending more money. And I think when I started working in IVF 20 years ago, people probably spent less for one cycle than they do today. And one of the reasons is because they're being offered more things. So we're going to talk a little bit about add-ons. Again, no judgment. I've been involved in my technical job, my last job, in offering and developing some of those so-called add-ons. So I believe in some of them. I put my hand up. That's not, that's my kind of admission today. But that doesn't change the fact that it usually means that someone's going to spend a lot more money than they thought they were going to, whether they think that add-ons are useful or not. Clinics are also consolidating to networks. So there are very few, or there are far fewer than when I began, clinics that are just standalone. So many of them are part of networks. And the reason I say that, again, not a judgment, it's not necessarily bad. It just means that there's the potential for less competition, certainly in terms of pricing. So if you have, 100 different clinics, they can all compete in different niches and try and win your business by offering better deals. But if you've got 20 clinics all part of a network, they've probably got quite standardized pricing. So again, not a judgment, just a fact, a reality that we have to face. And then a really important point is that the headline IVF costs, so when you look at some price lists and it will say the cost of IVF or the cost of ICSI, that is rarely the ultimate price you're going to pay. You're almost certainly going to pay considerably more than that. But there is good news. Success rates are improving as we get more treatment options. And that means that fewer cycles will be needed ultimately for the average patient. There are more clinics and there are more overseas options. And as I will say in my overseas slide, that can sometimes mean reduced prices for IVF in different countries where the wages might be lower and just other costs of living pricing might be lower. So you can get good deals by traveling overseas. But, my slide on that is to tell you what to watch out for. I usually try not to be too UK focused, but I have worked for the UK regulator. So it's useful to say that having some form of regulation and guidelines, and also in the UK at least, the Competition and Markets Authority, which has recently turned its eyes towards IVF and fertility, to make sure that I've put in inverted commas honest, keep clinics honest to make sure that patients aren't being too much oversold, or no conning of patients is going on. And hopefully this kind of talk is to help you navigate those waters better as well. I always say this, most clinic staff really want the best for patients. So I think everybody has got your back, but you need to go in with your eyes open when it comes to costs and pricing. There are more funding and financing options available than when I first got into IVF, and we've got a slide on that, so I'll tell you a bit about that. And I think there's a lot more support available today, and coaches. And I'd like to think that if you've got somebody on your side, a coach or some other kind of insider, they can help you navigate the pricing, the costs, and the financing better. So very briefly, I'm a clinical scientist with embryologist specialty, lots of years of experience in the field. I keep up to date with all the publications and by doing scientific reviewing. I saw a question in the chat earlier, actually, so I'm going to answer it now. And it said, are you still in biotech? Well, I've spent a lot of my career in biotech, but no, I left in January. So I'm no longer working in the biotech industry. I'm sort of a free agent, so to speak. And so I can concentrate on my various projects, but including the coaching. So I hope that answers that question. If you have any further questions on that, happy to answer them at the end. I've had a whole variety of different roles, clinical, commercial, academic, and regulatory roles in IVF. So I'd like to think I can see things from lots of different perspectives, a sort of more rounded view. Worked many countries overseas, so got more of a global perspective. I don't just think this is how we do it in the UK, everyone must do it that way. Having said that, there's a lot of similarities between the way things are done. Certainly the medical and the scientific aspect of it is pretty similar globally. And that means that this time period means I've been involved in the fertility journeys in some way in thousands of patients. So seen a lot of different things. And I think with that sort of, I don't want to sound like I'm bragging, but an important point to make is I will hold my hands up when someone asks me a question that I don't know the answer to and say, I don't know the answer to that, or I haven't got that information to hand. And as many of you know, I don't make recommendations anymore, but I do help people to find the way to what, the path to what they need. And I suppose the point I would say is because I've spent such a long time in this world, this industry, I usually know somebody who can provide an answer. So, fire away with your questions. I may not know the answer, but I probably know someone who does. So before starting fertility treatment, let's have some tips about things we really should do. Well, it's sad to say, but I really think you should be planning for more than one cycle. So you should be at least thinking, kind of like preparing for the worst, but expecting the best. So plan for more than one cycle. And that means from the financial point of view, plan for more than one cycle. Potentially speak to a financial planner or advisor, because this could be quite a big investment, and certainly other big investments in your life, home certainly, but some people an expensive car or other school fees or something like that. People speak to financial advisors to see whether they can really, whether they can do this, whether it's affordable. And I think that's not a bad idea, given that a lot of this advice can be free, to do that for your fertility journey and beyond. If you're successful, and that's what we all want for you, and you want, if you're successful, there's going to be a lot of costs after that as well. So I really think it's a sensible thing to speak to a planner and advisor. I've got a separate slide on publicly funded treatment, and I would definitely consider it. It may not be the right thing for you for lots of different reasons. Got a slide on that. And certainly if you're eligible, but I would always consider it. You don't have to do it. There's no compulsion to do publicly funded treatment, but it might be a really good way of getting that first cycle under your belt, so to speak. And I don't have a slide on this, but I think it's really important. We call it this in the UK. The HFEA, the regulator, has required clinics to provide a costed treatment plan. But I think the reason I'm focusing on that is it's important because having a price list is not the same as a costed treatment plan. It's very good that someone has a transparent price list and it's up to date and it's really clear what all the treatments are or what the particular things are on that price list. But you don't necessarily know which bits of that price list you might be using. So a costed treatment plan is really a way, after one of the consultations, first or second consultation with a doctor, to say, what are you likely to have from this menu of items? and then add it all together and say, this is what you're likely to pay, like maybe a minimum and a maximum, a range with an average in between. And that gives you an idea of, what kind of money you're needing to find to fund this treatment. And then another thing to say is that on those price lists, beware of a headline cost versus a package versus a fee for service. So they're all quite different. So it's all about reading the small print. And I'll say that a few times. Make sure you read the small print and ask questions appropriately. I would definitely consider multi-cycle packages, money-back plans, and even low-cost IVF. That's not me endorsing them or encouraging them or recommending them. It's saying it's something you should consider. Because if you walked into any kind of store and you wanted multiple items, you would always look at, is there a potential for a discount if I buy more than one at the same time, if I make a commitment? And as I said right at the top, because you're planning for more than one cycle, maybe it's worth looking into those volume discounts. Got a slide on that as well, so I'll cover that in a bit more detail. And then really important, set a financial boundary, also known as a budget, so that you don't just keep spending. Because I've met so many people over the years who've really broken the bank, sold their house, done all kinds of things to fund their treatment. And maybe in retrospect, they might have preferred to have put, drawn a line and made a budget to avoid overspending. So quickly on the funded treatment, this is unfortunately specific only to patients based in the UK and looking for treatment in the UK. But my friends at Fertility Mapper, this is one of those sort of TripAdvisor ratings sites, but it's independent and it's done by the patients themselves. So it's a great place to go and visit. I've got the website there for you, the URL. But this specifically is a tool they've just put on. I'm going to put it onto my website soon as well. But this is a quick and easy way to find out if you're eligible for free fertility treatment. And won't go into too many details, but I went there to see how quick and easy it was to do. And I didn't make up a fake name, but I used me and a fake partner and sort of said, okay, here's our situation. What's our chance of getting treatment and what do we do next? Unfortunately, I must have put too many ineligibility parts in. Maybe I put that I had a previous child or something, and that might be relevant to where I live. And I was declined treatment, but I recommend you do it. And if you're trying to find out which is the bit that makes you ineligible, should that be the result you get, you can always go back in and sort of tweak it and see what the thing is that made you ineligible. A little bit tiresome to have to do that, but if that's important to you and you don't want to just accept the answer no, you could always go in multiple times and try and figure out where that eligibility criteria is specific to you. But as I said, always good to consider free treatment because many of the NHS clinics in this country are very, very good. I've worked at a number of them, and they come under the same regulatory system. Many of them offer privately funded or self-funded treatment as well. So they are different, and I'm going to point out some differences in a second. But you can expect to get very good treatment, and you can look on the HVA website for the different success rates at these various clinics anyway. So a little bit about public versus private IVF treatment. Now these, possible pros in green and possible cons in red. And I always sort of recommend and encourage you to write lists of things so you can get some control over these things. So this is something I did. I wrote a not exhaustive list of what you might expect at a public IVF centre, NHS in this case, but I think this would be true in many countries actually, and a private IVF centre. So I think you'd probably get either free, if you're eligible, subsidised, or possibly cheaper treatment in a public IVF centre versus a private one. I think it could be safer because many of them are part of big hospitals, and if in the rare event that you had a medical incident, you're right there in the hospital, whereas many private clinics are sort of standalone and don't necessarily have access to that. Now, that may not be that important to you, but everybody's different and everybody has different needs and wants. So this would be part of your choosing a fertility clinic, different webinar, list of things to look at. Many public IVF treatments offer self-funded, as I mentioned, so that's good. So it doesn't have to be just funded cycles. But I would say on average, there are fewer treatment options available. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because some treatment options like egg donation are very well established, so you would get them at most centres. But some options, for example, PGTA, testing embryos, they're considered add-ons and they're not always offered at public centres. Then you might see that as a con, you might see that as a pro. But some of the things that I think would be considered cons is, in many cases, not all, there are longer waiting lists because there are funded patients. So yeah, publicly funded patients waiting to get in. And there are definitely some exclusions. Some of that exclusion will be done at the funding point, but some of it might be just to make sure they get a flow of patients, that their age limits, for example, might be different in public centres. But don't take my word for it that this is true of all centres. You must ask all these questions when you have a centre in mind that you would like to be treated at. Then private, I think it's fair to say that most of them are going to be considerably more expensive. But on the plus side, shorter waiting list, potentially fewer patient exclusions. You could argue better customer service, but I think that's probably quite variable. And more treatment options available. I think that's almost certainly true. So you see what I mean? It's not just a question of just saying public's better or private's better. It's about what you particularly need and want. So a little bit, this is definitely not exhaustive, because there's a lot of information available on this. And I'm not making a recommendation, just giving you, I might put it in the chat later. If you want to find out more about this, I know one particular company in the UK that offers this, called Access, ACCESS Fertility. Not endorsing them, not encouraging that, just saying that's one way you can find out more information. They offer lots of different ways of funding your treatment. Usually with partner clinics, it's not always standalone. And some clinics offer some of these deals, they're kind of self-insured, if you like, they do it in-house. So what do I mean by multi-cycle package? Well, obviously paying for multiple cycles up front, just like you might pay for 2 or 3 items in a store and get a discount because you committed to those 2 or 3 items. So essentially it's a volume discount. Why is that good for you? Because you get money off your treatment. Why is it good for the clinic? Because it's guaranteed income. Then you get things like money back offers, or refunds, or sometimes says money back guarantee. Different words. Always important to read the small print. And this is another way of describing this, is shared risk. So the company that's offering this deal is taking a risk, because they'll give you all or some of your money back if you fail to get pregnant. And given that we know that very few demographics would have 100% success rate, that means they are prepared to take the hit of losing money by giving it back to you. On the other hand, what they're banking on is making or optimizing the chance that you will get pregnant in the early number of cycles. So let's say it's a 3-cycle guarantee or your money back, then they want you to get pregnant in the first cycle. So that's a real positive, because obviously that's good for you. I mean, nobody would sign up to get pregnant only in their 3rd cycle. Everybody wants to get pregnant in their first cycle if they can. So they really are aiming for first cycle success. And that asterisk there, which we'll see again in a second, is really important, because it's all about seeing whether you're eligible for or you meet the criteria for being successful in IVF. So I think that when people are accepted on these programs, I say, you know what, that's actually quite a good sign. So if you were rejected from one of those programs on the basis of your history, your medical condition, or whatever, in a way that's sort of saying you haven't got as good a chance as the person who got into the program. These are just statistics. They're not, it's not true on an individual basis, but statistically, being included in one of those programs is probably a good sign for you. Another one, low-cost IVF. There are a small number of centres opening that offer very basic no-frills IVF. And I don't mean that in a negative way, no frills. It means they don't offer loads of extra treatments or add-ons, because they think the basic IVF is going to get you to where you need to be for routine cases. So it's another case, that asterisk, another case of it's a good sign that you're eligible. The only thing I would say, the only slightly cynical thing I would say is, obviously that's very attractive to people. Wow, I got accepted onto the low-cost IVF program. I'm going to spend very little. Isn't this wonderful? But if you're unsuccessful, there's a good chance that you'll probably stay with that clinic. So it is a kind of funnel to stay with that clinic. And then you may not be on low-cost IVF. You may be on a more complex IVF because your case didn't really meet the criteria. So I think the important thing here is, again, always read the small print. And some of the questions I'd be asking, this, again, not exhaustive list, is, can you drop out? If you have one cycle and you're not really that happy, can you get some of your money back, or are you committed for all of those cycles? Can you switch provider within a network? So I did work with some clients who had paid for 2 cycles within one network, and they didn't want to be treated at the same clinic again. They wanted to move to a different clinic. So I said, well, make sure you ask, because it wasn't clear in the information they got. Can you add treatments in, even though they weren't listed initially, or do you have to follow a prescribed course of treatment? So those are just some of the questions you might ask if you go down one of these routes. And what was the other thing I was going to say about it? Yeah, some of them have buy now, pay later, interest-free loans. So essentially, these are lots of ways of making IVF treatment more accessible to you. But, make no mistake, the clinic and the company offering the deal has done the maths, and, they know they're not going to lose. It's like, sorry to use a bad analogy, but it's like the casino. The house always wins, right? It's set up so that's the case, but it does make it accessible for you. So let's talk about some things during fertility treatment. So I would always query add-ons, not because I don't believe in them, but because sometimes they just get added on without you really knowing it and without a lot of thought. And to give an example, there are clinics in the US, and I'm not necessarily criticizing them. I'm just saying this is a clear case of, where's the thought process? And they'll just you always do embryo glue, always do PGTA, and maybe they haven't really considered what your particular needs are or whether it's what you really wanted. I would always query non-routine medications as well. I've got a specific slide on that. And I can tell you a few ways to potentially save money on medications, because that can be an extra cost that you weren't really expecting, particularly when you looked at the price list of the clinic. And then briefly, we'll talk about hidden costs as well, because they're not the same as add-ons. So what's an add-on? Well, as defined by the HVA, an optional, non-essential treatment offered in addition to proven or routine or basic fertility treatment. I've got a few examples here, but trust me, there is a very, very long list of these. There was a paper written by the European Society recently. I can't even remember the number, but it was, it might have been between 50 and 100 add-ons, and there could be more as well. So they really were just like casting the net to grab everything that wasn't routine. Now, don't forget, the routine stuff wasn't routine once. So I think, and that would be a separate talk to talk about add-ons in detail, but I'll give you some examples. Time-lapse incubation, which is used it's quite prevalent in the UK compared to many other countries. PGTA, the testing of embryos to identify the chromosomally normal ones, which I've worked a lot on in the past, and embryo glue, which actually, of those 3 things, probably has the most evidence of it working. But all of those things have a cost to them. And very few clinics, I would say, just include them as part of the treatment, because actually the regulator seems to have less of a problem when they're included for free, which doesn't make complete sense to me, because, if something doesn't work or it's potentially harmful, it doesn't matter if it's free, you shouldn't do it. But to give you an example or representative example, I went to some websites and got some what I thought were lower and what I thought were higher prices. So it's not an exhaustive list, but you can see time lapse in the UK at least, ranging from £250 to nearly £1,000 extra per cycle. PGTA, starting about $1,750 to $3,500. That's, in many cases that would be the same price as the whole IVF cycle. The headline IVF cycle at least. And embryo glue, £250 to £500. I appreciate that in some clinics, some of these are added a part of the total package cost. But just to give you an example of what an add-on might cost. So I would always ask these questions. Okay, so this is not about should I choose this add-on or should I choose that add-on? Alan, what do you recommend? It's not about that. That's another conversation. This is just to say, if you've got this series of add-ons that are being kind of suggested to you, you need to ask what results are published, what are the results at this clinic, what's your experience of this clinic? Would this be good for me specifically? Not, this is great for other people. Is it good for me, my age, my history, my particular circumstances? What are the likely benefits to me, costs, risks, and limitations. So it's a pretty standard list of questions, and you want to get decent answers to those questions. If the answer is, we really don't know, and there's not a huge amount of evidence or whatever, that's still a good answer. It at least helps you decide whether you want to do this or not. A bad answer is, being ignored or being fobbed off. So how to save money on your medications in IVF treatment. So we're going to look at this in two ways. I've put one in green, the routine standard meds that you almost can't do IVF without these meds, and the ones, and I've only used one example, there are many, many more, in sort of amber. So I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying, there's questions about whether they're really helping people and whether they have enough evidence to support their use. So let's start with the routine standard meds, the gonadotropins to stimulate the ovaries, the HCG to mature the egg, progesterone to support pregnancy. These are really standard drugs. But shop around. Is this available in a pharmacy? Can you get a better price? And all the things you would expect as a consumer. Can you get a better deal delivered to your door, whatever it might be, for a better price than what was offered initially? Ask questions about your dose. This is not for you to become the doctor, just like I don't want to become your doctor. I'm not qualified to do that, and I don't know your details, so I can't do that. But you can ask questions. You can say, oh, I've heard that for someone in my situation, maybe I don't need this really high dose. Is it really going to help? Because that's going to change the price. Maybe not a huge amount, but it's definitely going to change the price. Maybe this is covered by insurance. So maybe certain bits are covered by insurance and certain bits aren't. You should certainly ask about the medication because it's a different component to the treatment. And also consider being in a research project. Now, I don't mean one where it's all sort of untried and untested and, all kinds of weird experimental things are going to happen. I'm just saying, like, somebody might be trying drug A versus drug B. They've both been around for a while, but they just want to see whether one gives a slightly better or gives equivalence to the standard drug. And in many cases, you can get those drugs. You can get your drugs for free by being part of that research study. So I don't think you're taking a huge risk. And again, I'm appealing to people who have different wants and needs. Some people would not want to be involved in research. Other people would because they want to help the field. But also, it doesn't hurt to get some money off your treatment, right? So then, if we go to non-standard meds. For example, growth hormone. This is a case of one that I dealt with a client recently. And again, I wasn't saying, oh, you shouldn't have this. I know best. Not at all. I was just saying, this is definitely not standard. So here's some questions you need to ask. And they're the same questions. I've just been through them. So I'm not going to go through them again, except for one extra one. What are the side effects? And this particular patient did ask. And in my view, in our discussion together, got a pretty nondescript answer about side effects. And I said, are you happy with that answer? She said no. And I said, well, you know what to do next then. Change clinic, change doctor, whatever. Because you don't want to be unhappy with the answer you get. Because trying a drug that maybe hasn't got a huge amount of evidence behind it or history behind it for a different purpose, there may be side effects. And you may be the sort of person who doesn't want to take that kind of risk. So what's a hidden cost? I think this is very different from an add-on, so I want to explain. This is my definition: an unexpected cost that wasn't apparent when a treatment option was chosen. So we're talking about treatment options that are standard, things that we expect to do, we need to do, but sorry, I didn't really see that cost. It's different from, you said it was £50, but actually it's £100. That's just downright fraud or not keeping up to date. This is a hidden thing, something we didn't see. And I'll give you three good examples. There are many, many more. This may not be relevant to you, I understand that, but in egg freezing, this came out in the press relatively recently. Everything in many clinics, everything up to and including egg collection, freezing, and storage is covered by the price, the sticker price, so to speak, that somebody's paying. But often, and it's not always clear to the patient who's doing this, the subsequent thaw, fertilization, embryo culture, transfer, maybe ICSIs needed, testing, all of those things. Of course, they weren't listed in the set of treatments that the person signed up for, but they're things that, freezing an egg for itself, there's no value to that. It's only valuable, really, if you use it, and using it costs money, and those are the hidden costs. Storage, egg, sperm, and or embryo storage. This has changed quite a lot over the years, but it's always one to look at. how many years of storage are you actually paying for? Is it just the first year free? Because subsequent years will definitely be charged. You don't normally get storage for free, or subsequent years for free. And then another one, just another example, this came up with a client: import and export of eggs or sperm or embryos. Everybody knows about the courier fee. Everybody knows it's going to cost money to send it somewhere or to bring it somewhere. But often there's documentation that needs to be done as well. And I think, quite understandably, many patients would say, oh, well, I thought that was included. But it's usually a hidden cost. And they're not always big amounts, but they're kind of irritating amounts. So, I've dealt with this with a few clients in the past and said, well, you should definitely question it. And if you weren't told about it, then question it even stronger. So important points: educate yourself about the basic process, assume that nothing is free, read the small print, and definitely ask questions. And I've got a little bit, a slide at the end that will address this in a bit more detail. So after fertility treatment, really important to review your cycle, possibly with a coach, certainly with the clinic, and that will help you review and potentially reset your boundaries. Because if things went according to plan, but it didn't work, you might go, well, I've given that a go. If it didn't go according to plan, for me, that doesn't really count. If things don't go as you would expect, then I wouldn't necessarily count that as a real cycle. So your boundaries might be different. Consider refunds and potentially negotiate. And the reason why I say this, and I'll give you a bit of tips on this in a second, is because for a clinic to lose you as a customer, it's going to cost them a lot to get a new customer. So customer acquisition costs are high. So it's worth them keeping you, which means I would say there's always scope to say, look, I want to stay, but you need to help me here. And then obviously review not just the cycle and the medical and the physical and how you want to continue with treatment or not, but review your financial boundary, the budget. So I've dealt with boundaries before, and I'm going to be giving a webinar next month on this, but really, and you can see this on my website and on my Instagram, do a self-audit for these different things. So really say, how painful is the finances for me right now? And if, this is expensive for everyone, but if you're like, this is okay at the moment, I can deal with 2 cycles, then, maybe that's a low priority in terms of setting a boundary. But if it's up there with, this is really, really hurting, you definitely need that budget. You definitely need that cap. Clearly communicate it, make sure you're supported, looking after yourself. All I would say about boundaries, it's never too late to put one in place, and be firm with it, but also be flexible. If situations change, you can change your boundary. Here's the one I was talking about in terms of, I've put saying no and complaining. That sounds very negative, but what I really mean is, you've got the rights here. You're the person who's paying for this most of the time. 65 to 70% of cycles in the UK are funded by the patient themselves, not by the state. And you still have rights even if the state's paying for it. But if you're paying for it, you definitely want to ask the right questions. But whenever you're doing any of these things, asking questions, saying no, or complaining, inverted commas, be clear, concise, and precise. Be really clear about what it is that you have a problem with or what you're saying no to. Be persistent and put it in writing. It really helps to be able to say, here's the email I sent, versus, well, I'm sure we had that conversation, because then it becomes, a conversation is he said, she said. Go with a friend or family member, or get the support from a friend or family member. Clinics all should have a complaints process. So, this is not a thing they're unfamiliar with. But always try to resolve the issues amicably at first, because I think you're going to get quicker, better response by trying to do this in a friendly way rather than calling the lawyers, so to speak. Be friendly and firm, but be the squeaky wheel. And I've got some examples of how I've helped people not to complain, but to get where they needed to be by helping them ask the right questions. So just to conclude, really, we were going to talk about overseas treatment. It's obvious that you've got treatment-specific costs. And my kind of warning, I suppose, my beware is, people, when they look for overseas treatment, they tend to focus on the cost of the treatment. They go, well, look, it's I'm making these numbers up. It's $5,000 in the UK. It's $2,500 in this other country. But that's just the cost of the treatment. Of course, there may be repeat treatments, and there may be export of sperm, eggs, and embryos. So those are the things to do with the treatment itself. So they're all extra costs. And this is not me being against overseas treatment. I've had many friends and clients that I've sort of referred or suggested they look overseas, and they've been successful. But there are lots of other potential costs. The travel, and you've got to include everything, not just the flights if it's overseas by flight, the taxis, all of that extra cost that you might not have had if you stayed in your own country. Passports and visas, accommodation, meals and expenses. I know this is obvious, but I'm just saying it anyway. Time away from work. You are likely to spend more time away from work if you go overseas than if you stayed in your own country. Other costs, you might have to have people to look after existing children or family or pets, which you might not have to do if you were at home. And there may be legal costs because of the rules being different in different countries. So final thoughts on costs and funding IVF. Sort of summary, really. Choose the right clinic. We've talked about that before. It is probably the critical cost factor in how much money you're going to spend. Look at money back versus packages versus fee for service. So really read the fine print. Consider overseas treatment, but take on board what I've just said about the extra costs. Always ask questions and definitely read the small print. And if the small print's not there, then actually you have a good case if you later go to say, well, I don't really want to pay that because I was not made aware of that cost. Avoid falling into the funnel. So it's very easy once you go to a clinic to end up, basically paying the bill they put in front of you. But you have a lot of choice about whether you're going to say no or opt for different treatments or find a different way of getting the medications. So don't just fall into the funnel. Yes, they're there to make your life easier, but you do have rights and you do have the ability to say no and stop. You must prepare. Wherever you are on the journey, if you fail to prepare to fail. And failing here doesn't just mean failing a cycle. It means, losing more money than you expected to spend. So examples where a coach can help. I wanted to give you some recent examples of how I've helped people in terms of money. Okay, so worked with a customer who had an unsatisfactory cycle, and I said, look, excuse my French, I said, sometimes shit happens. This could be a case of this didn't go very well, and that happens. If every single, it's not true that every single cycle succeeds. So some of them have to fail or not do as well as they should have done. And I said, but I think you have a case for asking more questions about why this didn't work, because it didn't seem to match what was on the expected results, let's say. So they, after questioning that, having a little bit of to and fro with the medical director, they got a sizable refund. It wasn't the whole lot, but it was definitely a good contribution towards a future cycle. Had they not asked, they would have got nothing. You can be absolutely sure of that. Then worked with a client who, when I said to them, have you considered getting the drugs from a pharmacy? They looked into it and they realized they would have saved so far, over £850. So quite a lot. Questioning a medication. Again, I'm not being the doctor. I don't have all that expertise, but I said, you want to question this? Is this really something you want? Are you happy with this? Because they clearly weren't. That's why they came to me. And, that medication was more than £1,000. So non-routine medication. And then the final thing I want to say, there are many more examples. When I spoke to a client who said, oh, well, I've been to this clinic many times. And the reason I went there first is because, their headline, well, they didn't use the word headline, but their IVF cost is the lowest in the country. And I said, it's a great clinic. I'm not criticizing the clinic, but I'm going to have to argue with you on and differ with you on this point about it being the cheapest IVF in the country. I said, that's the headline rate. I have literally never met a patient who only spent the headline rate at that clinic. In fact, I've met people who spent over £100,000 at that clinic. So, I wish they had spoken to me. They still might have gone to that clinic, but I wish they'd spoken to me before they went to that clinic, just so they had their eyes open. So I ask you, what will your next steps be wherever you are in your journey? Why not book a free introductory call? Who knows what we might discover? No obligation. You've got nothing to lose. And I'm confident that you'll learn at least something. But hopefully you've learned something in this webinar tonight. So thank you and good luck. There's my email, my website, and my Instagram. Really look forward to speaking to some of you soon, but really excited to deal with your questions now. So let me just come out of this.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your presentation. Yes, it's all about, of course. So thanks a lot, Alan. Lovely to have your presentation, and that you have put all those details. As you mentioned, some of them maybe obvious, but I think it's rewatch it whenever you are planning your treatment. It's good to actually rewatch it and just take every step that you've mentioned in your presentation, and of course, prepare, let's say. And yes, now it's time for your questions. As you can see, there are some questions. However, I encourage anyone, if you have more questions, you know what to do. Go ahead, type those in, and we will go for the first question here. So you mentioned this during your presentation, IVF calculators. So how accurate are they? And in estimating the total expenses, do they also include medications, procedures, and additional fees?
Okay, great question. I don't think I did mention IVF cost calculators. I mentioned something else which I'll differentiate. I'm aware there's a few of these IVF cost calculators around, and I would say definitely try them, but they're sufficiently different for me to be able to answer that question, generically and say they all include this, they all include that. What I was actually talking about was a costed treatment plan, which is very specific to the UK, and that would be something that you should get given after your first or second consultation. So when they know what they're pretty much going to do, and that will include everything as you've outlined there. Those calculators are available on the web. I've seen some of them. I'm not familiar with all of them, so I can't, like I said, I can't say they all do this or that. I will certainly look into them more because I want to see how much variation there is. But as you've just done, this shows that you've done some of your homework. It shouldn't, if I'm right about this, it shouldn't just pop out a number at the end. It should give you, or what you should want is a kind of breakdown of where the money is going. So this is approximately how much for medications. This is approximately how much for the treatments. This is, in some countries they do personnel fees like physician fees and anaesthetist fees separately. I would say in the UK, I think we still have more consolidated fees for the IVF process, and then it's really add-ons and medications that are separate. So I know that's not a great answer for you, but I think knowing what you likely need in a cycle and then matching that against the calculated cost is probably the best thing. I don't necessarily think it's a useful thing just to have a number spat out at the end. To me, to use a strange analogy, that's a bit like, doing your tax return or something and then getting a number out at the end and going, I have no idea how that number came out and I just have to trust it. And I personally wouldn't like just getting a number. I would want a breakdown.
That makes sense. Definitely. It's interesting that you've mentioned that. Yeah. So you can have, as you mentioned, the details, not only the total one, just what the cost is for this and that. So thanks a lot. I think it was helpful. Helena, let us know if it's something that you found useful as well. And we have another question here as well, of course. So with your experience, what is your opinion on getting better embryos? What method has yield better statistic for quality embryos, the standard IV of the sperm and egg in the dish left to fertilize, or the ICSI method?
Okay, a little bit off topic, but we'll do it anyway.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, but it's a good question. So that is it's a very hard question, right? It's not an easy question to answer. One thing I would say though, so I'm going to give you loads of sort of bullet points. The first one to say is there's quite a lot of components to getting a good quality embryo, and one place it starts is with a good egg. Obviously, if you have a poor quality egg, it's really quite difficult to get a good quality embryo. In contrast, weirdly, you can have a very good quality egg and not such good sperm and sometimes get a good quality embryo. So this tells us that the egg is a very key component to getting a good quality embryo. But then to answer your question about standard IVF, conventional insemination versus ICSI, in the relatively few studies that have been done where they've compared it, the IVF quality has been marginally better, if I recall. But on average, I would say in a good quality lab doing a lot of ICSI, with decent skill, they're going to get good quality embryos as well. Okay, so there's a slight risk in doing ICSI. It's a tiny risk, but you're sticking a glass needle into an egg. And I've met patients on my coaching journey who've said, if I don't need ICSI, I don't want it, just because it feels like there's a sort of guarantee of fertilization, which is why some countries use it a lot. I don't like the idea of injecting a glass needle into my egg. And of course, there is a small risk of the egg being damaged. It's very small, but it's there. And so they would say, well, why bother? And that's also going to contribute to the potentially slightly lower quality embryo by doing that. But in reality, very similar quality embryos from IVF and ICSI when ICSI is done in a good laboratory. So I'm going to try and think of what's behind your question. If something behind your question is, should I do ICSI to get better quality embryos? Maybe. I would say, no, you should really only do ICSI, particularly in the UK. They're very strong on it in the UK. If you have a good reason to do ICSI. And that would either be, I'm really worried about failing fertilization and have a reason to feel that way, or the sperm parameters are such that the lab would be extremely uncomfortable doing IVF because of the risk of failed fertilization. So I don't know if that's answered your question, but trying to get a good quality embryo is a vast subject.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much, Alan. I think so. It's possibly an answer. I definitely think it was helpful and clear. But of course, let us know. And there's another question here. Is there a regional price difference for fertility clinics across the UK? Would treatment in London be more expensive than up north? Interesting question.
That's a great question. And this isn't a cop-out. I mean, there's a simple answer to this, and I think the simple answer is I think treatment in London would be more expensive. But that's on average. So you're talking about regions, and we're talking about average clinics. Of course, there'll be a clinic in the north that's more expensive than a clinic in the south or in London, because people will be, adjusting their pricing. But in reality, prices aren't fixed, but people are always looking at each other's pricing. Okay, so if you're working in the southeast or London, you're going to have to have a very strong reason to undercut everybody by a huge amount to be, absolutely the cheapest clinic in town. So in reality, the prices all sort of equilibrate in regions. But I think on average, almost certainly the prices in the south and London specifically will be more expensive than in the north.
Makes sense again. Unfortunately, I would say as well, but that's how it is. And I will have a question in the meantime regarding actually those IVF options or IVF clinics that sometimes are cheaper. Many people are wondering what are the tricks like there. If there is a clinic and you see that the price for IVF is this, and then you see another clinic and the price is much higher, what we should look for.
Okay, so I think there's quite a lot of layers to that question. It's a great question, and it's links to that story I told you about the person saying, "Oh, this is the cheapest clinic in the whole of the country," right? So that's just using the example of read the small print carefully. Are you just paying for IVF, the procedure, the sort of egg collection, embryo culture, blah blah blah, or is it including lots of other things? Is there embryo glue? Is the storage for the frozen embryos included, all of that stuff? So you really need to get that costed treatment plan, or do it for yourself almost. Say, this is what I would expect to get. This is what I've been told that I might get. I might get 5 embryos, I might transfer 1 and freeze 3. So what are my likely costs? That's what a costed treatment plan does. So you really want to compare apples and apples.
That makes sense again, of course.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So no, not possible. We need to definitely study and just to see clearly what the cost is. Really.
Yeah, and then the other thing. Okay. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. The other thing is, if you were talking about one of these clinics that genuinely offers the whole package for considerably less, they may be doing that, but only for people who are eligible for that treatment. So that's what I mean about it's quite a good sign if they choose you and they say, oh, you're under 30, you've it's male factor infertility, so we don't think there's a problem with you. We've done all the tests on you, the lady. Your hormones are fine. All of these things. So you meet all these criteria, and then they say, there's not much point doing all these extra things. Let's do the basic IVF, maybe with ICSI, and so we can afford to give it you at this price. And it's like I said, there's the cynical part is if you fail with that treatment, they'll probably say, well, you might need this now, but they've already got you as a customer. So, you went in legitimately with a good chance of being somebody who will succeed with the basic treatment, but you're coming out as a patient who needs extra things. So, I wouldn't say beware of that. Just have your eyes open about that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. One more question we did receive in the meantime. So are there any special organizations that you are familiar with that can support you in funding IVF if you are on a low income and you don't qualify for an NHS support?
Okay, so a number of different options here, and this is not an exhaustive list because I'm not, I haven't got all the information to hand, but I think there's opportunities for loans and buy now, i.e. get now and pay later. So there's these different things. I mean, I realize if you're on a low income, it might be a case of, well, you can never pay all of that. So, but I'm just using the example of someone who can't pay all of it now as one example. Caroline will probably be able to say something about this as well, because I don't want to get the name wrong, but I know there's at least a couple of organizations, and I think European Fertility Society or some branch of it, as well as some other organizations, offer free treatment to certain people. I don't know if it's a competition or a draw or something like that, but I know there are some that do that.
Yeah,
I think I would say, and maybe you can say something, Karen, but I would say it's always worth asking. This is all about, don't be afraid to ask. You could probably even go to a clinic and say, look, I can't afford this and I'm not eligible for NHS. Would you be prepared to do something? I would be happy to be in a newsletter or something, or a marketing piece. You may not be happy to do that. I'm just saying, if it's real desperation stakes, then there's always ways of doing this. Okay. I don't know if there's any bigger organizations that are offering funding, but maybe Caroline knows more.
Yes, of course. Fertility Road is currently running this, and actually there is a couple that already agreed this will be a free treatment. So it's done, I think, mostly every year. So it's hard for me to exactly tell you how it's working, but of course there are some options, and every year it's done. It's like a free IVF treatment for couples. So it's always a chance. You can have a look at fertilityroad.com, and there will be some more information on that as well. So you can have a look as well, right? Doesn't hurt to try.
Yeah, and I did say it, but actually it's a relevant answer to this question. Not just with medications getting free or subsidized treatment, but other aspects of your treatment might be the subject of a research study. So I would look for, or I would certainly ask the clinic that you maybe are interested in, ask if there's any research which would help to subsidize your treatment, because there may very well be.
Right. Okay.
Because they're always looking for people. It's quite hard to recruit people for either marketing or research. And, I'm sorry if that sounds a bit sort of mercenary, but we're dealing with reality here, right? And if your only option is to get treatment is to, put your face in a newsletter or to be involved in a research study, as long as you're happy with it and you're fully informed, then why not? Why not get the benefit from that?
Exactly. Of course, I totally agree here. So thanks a lot for putting this as well. And someone is typing. Let's give it a second. Let's see if it's another question or it's something, some comments. And we will be finishing slowly. But if you have something else you wish to add, you can still do it. Okay.
Yes.
Your service on your website would a couple be able to hire you to help them in their whole journey if it takes 6 months, etc., etc.?
Yeah,
All right.
I'm expecting people to be on a longer journey. It's not like, but it's up to you. It's let's contact me. Let's have a chat about it and see how I can help. Maybe I can help. Maybe I can't. I'll be very honest with you. So, but yes, I mean, I don't expect people to go. This is only going to take a week. I know that journeys can take quite a long time. So, yeah.
Of course, definitely. And I can put the link for you when it comes to Fertility Road. I just looked it up just to show you. You can have a look at those fertility journeys project. You can have a look and see. There were some couples that already took part in it, so you can have a look, of course, for sure. And I believe that,
I just put Access Fertility in the chat, not endorsing them or promoting them, just saying I know that's one of the companies that can offer financing. So.
Okay, sure. Thank you so much. And we will be finishing for today, but thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Alan, for answering, and thank you for your time. It's definitely quality time that we spend here, and there is lots and lots of information that is useful for everyone, I'm sure. So thanks a lot. In the meantime, Melinda added, looking at how much we have to spend on medicine. What's your thoughts on budgeting for supplements? I feel like I'm spending so much on this.
Yeah, great question. I haven't got a simple answer. The simple answer would be, if you're okay with this, like, book a call, free call, and let's talk about how many supplements you're on and what they're doing or what they're not doing. And I'll give you a final. This may not be you, so I'm not pointing this at you. But I've spoken to some men who've been using supplements. They've been using like 3 times the dose they were recommended. Now, I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm just saying supplements can get very expensive very quickly with, I would say, questionable value, and certainly questionable value if you're not taking the right dose. So let's have a discussion about that, because the main thing is to make sure you get what you need, right? The right thing, what you need at the right time, not just to throw the kitchen sink and hope that something sticks.
True. Thank you so much. So if you wish to get in touch with Alan directly, you can do so. And that will be best, I think, in this case, because that's the truth. We've done many webinars, and every now and then, every doctor is repeating that sometimes we take too many of those and it doesn't help, in fact, and it can even have the opposite outcome. So we need to be aware of that as well. So thank you so much indeed. Alan, again, thanks a lot. We will see each other quite soon. There will be another event, Ask Your Doctor, on the 7th of May, and there will be another event with Alan as well on the 23rd of May. So please join us, and I'm sure it's going to be an interesting session, this one and the next one as well. And of course, right now, I would like to encourage you to take part in our survey. Right after we finish, there will be some 8 questions, so like 2 minutes of your time. If you can share your feedback, that would be great. This is just so we can improve and simply have some questions for you. So if you have those 2 minutes, please go ahead and fill it in. Okay, thank you so much. See you soon. We will be back on Thursday. We have another event, and we will discuss IVF treatment over 40. So I hope you will be able to join us. Dr. Elias Tsakos will be with us once more. And if you have more questions, you know what to do. Just hope to see you here. All right. Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening. And
Thanks. Bye-bye.
see you soon. Bye.
Bye.